30-year-old Mateusz Kawecki was from the small village of Hutkow in southeastern Poland. In 2018, he and his father were living and working as a construction worker in the German city of Hanover and had been doing so for around 5 years. Migrating over the border to Germany put a lot of strain on Mateusz's relationship with his long-term girlfriend, who was pregnant with his child and living in a small village named Lipia Góra in northwestern Poland. Mateusz was desperate to be the best father possible, hence why he has uprooted his life in his native Poland to earn a considerably more lucrative wage in neighboring Germany. In light of this, he had promised the mother of his firstborn child that he would do anything and everything he could to be present at the birth. Then, on March 28, 2018, after a long 9 months of pregnancy, Mateusz got the phone call he had been waiting for. The mother of his child, who by that time was his fiancée, had just gone into labor. Mateusz jumped in his 1998 BMW 525 and took full advantage of the absence of any legal speed limit on the German Autobahn to tear across rural Germany in the direction of the Polish border and his fiancée in Lipia Góra. It was 11:30 p.m. when he got the news, and at a 402 miles, the drive across Germany would be a long one. With Mateusz set to arrive in his girlfriend's home village at around 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. the following morning. Yet despite his dedication to be there at the birth of his firstborn child, Mateusz never arrived in Lipia Góra. When later questioned by investigators, Mateusz's father claimed that he received a call from his son on the morning of March 29th. It was around 10:30 a.m. when Mateusz told him that he had been stuck for around 2 hours in a heavy traffic jam around a place called Szczecin, a town on the Polish side of the border that's just over 100 miles from Lipia Góra. At around the same time, Mateusz also sent a text message to his fiancée stating that he was approximately 2 hours away from arriving and that he hoped he would make it in time for the birth. This was the last communication the construction worker sent before he seemingly dropped off the face of the earth. As the hours went by, and Mateusz's fiancée got closer and closer to giving birth, she became increasingly worried at his unexplained absence, especially when, for some apparent reason, he was unable to answer her calls or texts. The fiancée grew frantically worried, already intensely stressed by the birthing experience, and ended up contacting Mateusz's sister at around 5 p.m. that same day. She said the same thing, that she had been calling her brother's phone almost non-stop, and whenever she could actually get through, the call would ring out, as if there was simply no one there to pick up the phone. This was deeply concerning for all involved. To everyone's knowledge, Mateusz was still in the car, within arm's reach of his phone. Even in the unlikely event that he had stopped to eat or fill up on gasoline, he could have been able to at least answer or return calls. In their eyes, something pretty dreadful must have happened to keep him from seeing the birth of his first child. So later on that evening, Mateusz's mother called up her local department of the Polish police force, but since he had been missing only a matter of hours, they essentially refused to file a report on her behalf, since it was more likely he would turn up. Yet days later, there was still no sign of Mateusz. His baby had been born, and his fiancée as well as his family were worried sick about him. They made efforts to report him missing to police agencies in both Germany and his native Poland, but German law enforcement refused to begin an investigation since their Polish counterparts had already commenced one. One thing that was obvious throughout the entire investigation is the blatantly uncooperative attitude displayed between the German and Polish police. Not only did they seem unwilling to share information or work together in any kind of coordinated effort, but each seemed to take the attitude that it was the responsibility of the party to bear the brunt of the investigative efforts. For example, Mateusz's family asked Polish police to locate his cell phone as a starting point for their investigation, since it was apparently still switched on for a few days after he had initially disappeared. But the Polish police were unable to get a ping off of the SIM card, since it was under the control of a German-based carrier. Then, when they contacted German police with regards to the cell phone's location, they discovered they couldn't be helped either, since Mateusz had disappeared on the Polish side of the international border. Then, after some investigation on their part, Polish police claimed that at no point did Mateusz's phone connect to a Polish network, and questioned whether or not he had actually crossed the border into Poland at all. Growing incredibly frustrated with the floundering investigation, Mateusz's family began their own private investigation into his disappearance. They enlisted the help of concerned friends and family members, as well as private investigators, the plan being to thoroughly and intensely search the entire route from Hanover to Lapia Gora. They made a point to drive up and down side roads, asking for copies of CCTV tapes at roadside businesses and talking to employees at gas stations. They took with them pictures of Mateusz, showing them to everyone they could in the hopes of jogging some memories, but not a single person recognized his image, nor could they provide any useful information. 6 months went by, and there was still no sign of Mateusz. What was all the more confusing is that it appeared that not only had he himself vanished from the face of the earth, but so had his car and his phone, the former being not so easy to hide or dispose of. In those 6 months, his family appeared on Polish current affairs and news programs, appealing for information and complaining that the police on either side of the border were not doing nearly enough to find their missing relative. Then on September 12th, with the family quickly giving up hope of ever seeing Mateusz again, a neighbor of his mother called over to their home to ask about the family barn. The barn was pretty close to the neighbor's property, and they suspected one of the animals it housed had died during a cold snap, since during the warmer parts of the day an extremely unpleasant smell could be detected when in close proximity to it. Mateusz's mother checked the situation out, but found that all their animals were alive and well, yet the smell persisted. The barn in question had a walled-off section that served as a storage space for farm equipment, but the brickwork meant that there was a small kind of ceiling to the structure. Since every part of the barn except the small ceiling had been searched, Mateusz's mother, along with the neighbor, used a ladder to climb up onto it. What they discovered horrified them. On top of the brickwork was what at first appeared to be a pile of clothing. There was also 2 hangman's nooses hanging from the rafters, and what seemed to be a backpack of some description near the pile of clothes. But as soon as one of the pair shined a flashlight over the mass of clothing, they discovered it was actually a human corpse, still clad in the clothes they had died wearing. Although the corpse was far too decomposed to be recognizable, it was clear that the head had been severed from the body. I know the conclusion seems obvious, but we have to remind ourselves that Mateusz wasn't headed for Hutkau, his home village, but his fiancée's, which was on the completely opposite side of Poland with a whopping 370 miles between them. His home village was in no way on the route to Lapia Gora, and there was no reason to believe that he could have been anywhere near Hutkau. Nevertheless, and to the heartbreak of his family, the body was determined to be that of Mateusz. Yet shockingly, the cause of death was deemed that he had taken his own life. This was completely absurd given that one of the young man's shoes was found in the barn, with a severed foot still inside. It was also discovered that some of his teeth had been knocked out, and he was stuck in his clothing in a mass of dried viscera. Whatever happened to Mateusz had obviously involved violence and dismemberment in some form, and the family was outraged that such obvious clues could be so negligently overlooked. While it's entirely possible for the skull of a hanging body to become detached after dangling for some time during the decomposition period, the knocked-out teeth were a dead giveaway that something was seriously amiss. Perhaps one of the most curious details surrounding the items left behind on the brickwork ceiling is an empty bottle of orange juice that was found in the backpack. Mateusz's family insisted that he didn't like orange juice or citrus in general, and that this was strong evidence that he had been murdered by someone who had then disposed of the empty bottle inside of the backpack. Though Polish police refused to take this up as a serious clue, and apparently didn't bother to check the bottle for fingerprints or DNA material at any point during the investigation. But the most prominent mystery of the entire case, aside from the events surrounding Mateusz's actual death, is what happened to his car. The 1998 BMW 525, which he traveled out of Hanover in, has never been found either in Germany or in Poland. Neither were the car keys or the vehicle's registration, which in theory should have been in Mateusz's wallet, which was actually found in the backpack left in the barn. What's more is that despite reappearing in his home village at some point, no one saw Mateusz or his car. For all intents and purposes, it appears he somehow infiltrated his home village in order to end his own life in his family barn. But there is obviously so much more to the case than that, and the reasons for him taking his own life, especially given that he was a new father, are extremely spurious. Both the Polish police and state prosecutor insist that Mateusz's death was in fact him taking his own life, and have since declined to investigate any further, even in the face of insistent appeals from all of his family and friends who assert that the whole thing has been a gross miscarriage of justice. Whether or not this is them being in denial over the idea that their loved one did indeed take their own life is another question entirely. But if it were me, I would certainly be suspicious of some of the details discovered by police, and entirely frustrated by their seeming unwillingness to investigate seriously. Mateusz was a new father, had a loving fiancée, and was doing extremely well in his chosen construction career, so there's little reason to believe that he had those sort of ideations to end his life. But then again, given the insidious nature of depression and mental illness, it is a possibility that we can't entirely rule out, despite the evidence to the contrary. Given the refusal of the police to further investigate, we may never, ever find out what really happened to Mateusz in the aftermath of his immediate disappearance. And if it is indeed the case that he was murdered, and him ending his own life was staged to deter investigators from pursuing a suspect, it's entirely possible that his murderer is still free to roam around Central Europe at their leisure, feeling a grimly smug feeling that they have literally gotten away with murder.